The thing about betrayal is you never see it coming, not until it's got its hands in your pockets and a knife in your back. People like to think they'd notice the signs, that they'd pick up on the little shifts, the inconsistencies. But that's the lie we tell ourselves. The truth is, you don't see it until you're already bleeding. My name's Garrett Dalton. I'm 52 years old. I run my own consulting firm, though most of my work is private investigation these days. People come to me when they need something done quietly, efficiently, and without the mess of cops or lawyers screwing it up. I grew up in the system, bounced from one foster home to the next until I was old enough to fight my own battles. Never had much patience for authority, but I learned early that if you're smart and quick on your feet, you don't have to play by their rules. You just have to be better at the game. I met Lorraine when we were in our 20s. Back then, she had this energy, bright, sharp, like she could see through any kind of bullshit. We built something together. A business, a life. Thought we understood each other. Turns out, I was wrong. It started with little things. Lorraine used to wait up when I worked late. I'd come home. She'd be reading or watching some crime show, a glass of wine on the table. One night, I noticed the lights were off. No Lorraine. Just silence. Figured she'd gone to bed early, but then I saw her phone on the counter, face down. She never used to do that. I didn't say anything. Not at first. You don't go through life making accusations without proof. That's how idiots get themselves played. So I did what I do best. I watched. Patterns tell you everything. A sudden interest in the gym, a new perfume she never used to wear. Text she'd closed too fast. One night, she came home late. I was in the kitchen, nursing a whiskey, flipping through some case notes. She walked in, set her purse down, and exhaled like she'd been carrying the weight of the world. Long day, I asked without looking up. Yeah, she said, tugging off her earrings. Meeting ran over. Then I grabbed a drink with Raquel. Raquel. Solid alibi. Except Raquel had posted a picture on Facebook that night. Her and her husband, at a concert downtown. No Lorraine in sight. I didn't call her on it. Not yet. Instead, I did what I always do. I gathered intel. Pulled her phone records, checked locations. She was careful, but not careful enough. A number kept showing up. Repeated calls, texts, late at night. Wyatt Sanford. I remembered the name from years back. A tattoo shop on the north side, Black Ivy Ink. The kind of place that catered to a certain crowd. Hipsters, lost souls looking for meaning in ink. Lorraine wasn't the type. Or at least, I thought she wasn't. Next step was surveillance. Not the kind you see in movies. No fancy gadgets. No sitting in a van with binoculars. Just a couple of well-placed cameras, a borrowed car parked a few streets down, and patience. 2 nights later, I had my answer. Lorraine and Wyatt, sitting across from each other at Bellagio's, an upscale Italian joint we used to go to on anniversaries. Candlelight. Wine. His hand on hers. The kind of touch that lingers. The kind that doesn't belong to just friends. When they left, he walked her to her car. She leaned in first. The kiss wasn't quick, wasn't guilty. It was slow. Familiar. I let the footage sit for a day before I watched it again. Then, I poured myself another drink and made a decision. Lorraine thought she was playing a game. What she didn't realize was that I'd already won. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset. Anger and grief are distractions, and I don't do distractions. I stayed up because I was planning. By the time the sun cracked over the city skyline, I had every piece in place. First step, confirmation. People lie, patterns don't. I pulled out my phone and called Ryan Baxter. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. Jesus, Garrett, it's 6 in the damn morning. Need a favor. Of course you do, he grumbled. This better not involve digging through someone's offshore accounts. I'm still cleaning up after the last time. Nothing illegal. Just need a deep dive on a guy. Wyatt Sanford. Runs Black Ivy Inc. Tattoo guy? What's the angle? Just find out if he's got anything to lose. Ryan sighed. You know, normal people go to therapy when they have problems. Yeah, well, I'm not normal people. Fine, fine. Give me a few hours. I hung up and moved to step 2, establishing control. You don't just blow up a marriage on a whim. You prepare. You set the board. Make sure when the pieces fall, they land exactly where you want them. I made 2 calls, one to my lawyer, the other to my financial guy. The first was to start separating assets, shifting things around so Lorraine couldn't blindside me with some divorce play. The second was about information, because money, more than anything else, tells a story. By noon, Ryan was back with an answer. Your boy Wyatt's got problems. 2 years behind on taxes, business loans stacking up, shop barely breaking even. If the IRS sneezes in his direction, he's done. Perfect. Oh, and one more thing, he's got a record. Assault charge 15 years ago. Didn't stick, but still. Not exactly a Boy Scout. Interesting. Who'd he hit? Ryan clicked his tongue. Some guy his ex was seeing. Seems our friend has a history of not handling relationships well. That was useful. People repeat patterns. Lorraine thought she was stepping into some grand romance. But odds were, Wyatt wasn't the Prince Charming she thought. Now I just had to make sure she saw it. That night, I kept things normal. Didn't let on that I knew anything. Lorraine came home late again, the faintest trace of perfume clinging to her clothes. She walked into the kitchen, set down her purse, and glanced at me. You're home early, she said. I nodded, sipping my whiskey. Wrapped things up quicker than I thought. She hesitated. Just for a second. Good day. I met her eyes, let the silence stretch a little too long before I answered. Yeah, learned a few things. She shifted, tucking her hair behind her ear, a nervous tick I'd seen 100 times. Yeah? Like what? I let a slow smile pull at the corner of my mouth. Oh, business stuff. She nodded, forced a smile, and disappeared into the bedroom. She didn't know it yet, but I had just started the game. The next morning, I made my move. I started with a visit to Black Ivy Inc. Not to make a scene, that would be stupid, but to get a read on the man himself. You can tell a lot about a guy by the way he carries himself. The shop was in one of those neighborhoods that used to be rough but had been swallowed by gentrification. A coffee shop on one side, a yoga studio on the other. The kind of place where people paid too much for handcrafted soap and called it self-care. I pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead. The place smelled like antiseptic and ink, a couple of tattoo chairs lined up against the walls. A girl with purple hair sat at the front desk, scrolling on her phone. Need an appointment? She asked without looking up. Nah, I said. Just wanted to check the place out. Heard a lot about it. She glanced at me then, took in the jeans, the worn leather jacket, the fact that I didn't belong in a place like this. Yeah? From who? Before I could answer, the man himself walked out from the back. Wyatt Sanford. He was taller than I expected, lean, with that kind of casual swagger that guys like him wore like armor. His arms were covered in ink, dark lines stretching from wrist to shoulder. His eyes, sharp, calculating, met mine, and I knew right away he was trying to place me. Something I can do for you? He asked. I smiled, slow and easy. Just curious. My wife's been talking about getting some work done. Thought I'd see the place for myself. Something flickered in his expression. A half-second of hesitation before he covered it up. That right? I let the silence sit between us. It made people uncomfortable. It made them fill the space with something, words, movement, mistakes. Wyatt wasn't immune. She booked something already? He asked, a little too casual. Nah. She's still thinking about it. I leaned against the counter, tapping my fingers against the wood. You do consultations? He nodded once. Yeah. Free of charge. Good to know. I pushed off the counter and met his eyes. Guess I'll be seeing you around. I walked out without another word, leaving the door swinging behind me. I didn't need a fight. I just needed him to feel the weight of my presence. Let him wonder how much I knew. Let him sweat. The next step was paperwork. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Raquel Croft. We'd worked together before. She handled my contracts, made sure I never left anything on the table. You sure about this? She asked, scanning the documents. Dead sure. She nodded, flipping to the next page. Splitting assets before you even file. It's aggressive. Smart, but aggressive. If she's been stepping out, though, she won't have much ground to fight back. She won't. Raquel smirked. Cold. I like it. I signed the papers. Lorraine wouldn't know it yet, but I had already started pulling my money out of our joint accounts, moving things to places she couldn't touch. I wasn't going to leave her broke. That wasn't my style. But I wasn't going to let her walk away with the life we built together while she played house with some second-rate artist either. That night, I made dinner. A rare thing. Nothing fancy, just steak, potatoes, a bottle of wine. When Lorraine came home, she hesitated in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she'd walked into the right house. You cooked. I poured myself a drink, nodded toward the plate I set for her. Figured we should have a nice meal together. She sat down slowly, watching me like I was a landmine she wasn't sure how to step around. This is nice. Yeah. I took a sip of whiskey. Figured you deserved something nice. A flicker of guilt crossed her face. just for a second. Then she picked up her fork, trying to act normal. We ate in silence. She barely touched the wine. When the plates were empty, I leaned back in my chair and met her eyes. You happy, Lorraine? The fork in her hand stilled. What? I swirled the whiskey in my glass, watching the way she gripped the stem of hers, too tight. Simple question. You happy? She hesitated. Too long. I don't know, she said finally. Are you? I let the silence stretch, let her sit in it. Then I stood, picked up my plate, and set it in the sink. I am now. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't have to. The pieces were already falling into place. The next morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Ryan's voice came through the line, laced with amusement. Well, guess who got a visit from the IRS today? I let the corner of my mouth twitch up. Tell me it was thorough. Thorough enough. They walked in with a clipboard and enough attitude to make a grown man sweat. Word is, our boy Wyatt's books are a mess. Back taxes, missing paperwork. It's gonna be a headache for him. Good. And, just to sweeten the deal, I had a little chat with a friend over at the health department. They're gonna be real interested in a few violations at Black Ivy Inc. I chuckled. You're a bastard, Ryan. You say that like it's news. I hung up, then sat back in my chair, watching the city stretch out beyond my office window. It wasn't about revenge, it was about control. About making sure the people who thought they could outmaneuver me learned just how wrong they were. That night, I took Lorraine out. Not to talk. Not to fight. Just to watch her. The Legio's was busy, the kind of place where people spoke in low voices and spent too much money on wine. The waiter, Marcus, I remembered, greeted us with that professional detachment that came from years of working in places like this. Mr. Dalton. Mrs. Dalton. He nodded politely, leading us to a table. Good to see you both. Lorraine barely looked at him. She'd been quiet since we left the house, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. I took my time with the menu. Ordered a steak. Rare. She picked out a salad. Halfway through the meal, I leaned back and took a sip of my whiskey. Ran into someone today. She glanced up, wary. Oh, Wyatt Sanford. She went still, just for a fraction of a second. If I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. I let the silence hang, watched her swallow before she forced herself to speak. What were you doing at a tattoo shop? I smirked. Didn't say I was at a shop. Her breath hitched, barely audible. She covered it up fast, pushing her fork through her salad like it mattered. Then where? I shrugged. Around. Marcus arrived at the table then, setting down my plate with careful precision. He glanced at Lorraine, his expression unreadable, then back at me. Can I get you anything else, sir? I met his eyes, let the weight of the moment settle. I think I have everything I need. He nodded once and stepped away, but Lorraine wasn't touching her food anymore. Garrett, she started, but I shook my head. Not here, I said, my voice calm. She exhaled sharply, then pushed her chair back. I need some air. I let her go. Let her sit with it. By the time we got home, she was ready to talk. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, her jaw tight. What are you doing? I grabbed a glass, poured myself a drink. What do you mean? Cut the act, Garrett. You know. I took a sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. What do I know, Lorraine? Her shoulders dropped, her face pale. She knew she was cornered. Knew there was no talking her way out of this one. How long? I asked. She didn't answer. Just shook her head, like she was still trying to find a way to spin it. How long? I asked again, my voice sharper this time. She closed her eyes. 6 months. I nodded, let that settle in. Why? Tears welled up, but I wasn't interested in them. She'd made her choices. I don't know, she whispered. Don't. I cut in. Don't lie to me on top of it. She swallowed hard, then looked away. I felt forgotten. I chuckled, low and humorless. Forgotten? You mean after everything I built for us? The life I put together? I was working, Lorraine. For us. I didn't want money, Garrett, she shot back, her voice breaking. I wanted you. I let that hang for a moment, then set my glass down on the counter. You wanted a fantasy. And now you've got one. Hope he was worth it. Her face crumpled, but I was already walking past her. The game was over. Now, it was time for the checkmate. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. Anger is for men who don't have a plan. I had a plan. And by the time the sun came up, I was already making my next move. Lorraine was in the shower when I left. She hadn't said much after our talk in the kitchen, just sat there, staring at nothing, like a woman who realized she'd just played her last hand and lost. I drove downtown, parked outside a nondescript office building, and took the elevator up to the law firm of Croft and Lanning. Raquel was already at her desk, sharp suit, dark coffee, eyes that missed nothing. "You look like a man about to burn his house down," she said, leaning back in her chair. I dropped a folder on her desk. "I need this file today." She flipped it open, scanned the first page. Divorce papers. That didn't take long. Shouldn't have taken this long. She smirked. "You're not going for blood?" "I'm going for clean." I leaned forward, tapped the page. She gets what she walked in with. Nothing else? Raquel raised an eyebrow. "And she's just going to accept that?" "She will," I said, and she understood. She slid the folder into her inbox. "I'll get the ball rolling." "Anything else?" I nodded. "I need an official audit on Black Ivy Inc. Someone with a badge and a clipboard to go in and start pulling numbers." Raquel let out a low whistle. "Wyatt." I met her eyes. "I want his life to be as much of a mess as he made mine." She grinned. "See, now that sounds like you." By the time I left, the wheels were in motion. Lorraine was about to get hit with paperwork she wouldn't see coming, and Wyatt was about to learn what happens when you step into the wrong man's life. I made one more stop before heading back home. Ryan had set up a little insurance policy for me, a discreet recording of Lorraine's confession, tucked away in a cloud storage account, just in case she decided to get bold and try to twist things in court. I walked into the house just as Lorraine was stepping out of the bedroom, towel around her head, eyes wary. She knew something had shifted. I tossed an envelope onto the table. "You'll want to look at that." She hesitated before picking it up, her fingers tightening when she saw what it was. "Garrett." "Save it." I poured myself a drink, took my time. "I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to fight. I'm just done." She sank into the chair, flipping through the papers. "You already had this drawn up?" I met her eyes. "Did you think I was going to wait around and beg?" Her breath hitched, but I didn't care. "Take the deal, Lorraine. It's more than you deserve." She looked down, the weight of it all finally sinking in. But I wasn't done. "You might want to check in on your boyfriend," I added, watching her flinch. "He's about to have a very bad week." She looked up, and for the first time in a long time, I saw fear in her eyes. Good. That meant she finally understood exactly who she had been dealing with. She sat there for a long time, staring at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving. They wouldn't. I had made sure of that. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, like she was testing the waters. "Garrett, can we talk about this?" I took a slow sip of my drink, let the weight of the moment settle. "We're talking." "You know what I mean," she said, her fingers gripping the papers. "This is a lot. You're just ending it." I let out a short laugh. "I didn't end it, Lorraine." "You did. You just thought you'd get to decide how." Her jaw tightened. "It wasn't like that." I raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't like what?" "You weren't sneaking around? Lying to my face? Sleeping with another man?" I set my glass down with deliberate ease. "Then what was it like?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing there wasn't an answer that would change the outcome. "Take the deal," I said again. "It's clean. You don't get to take what we built, but you don't walk away with nothing." Her hand shook just slightly as she set the papers down. "You planned all of this, didn't you?" I met her eyes. "Of course I did." She inhaled sharply, then shook her head. "I don't even know who you are anymore." I let that sit between us for a second before I leaned in. "You never did." She looked away first. That told me everything I needed to know. I left her sitting there and grabbed my keys. There was one more stop I had to make. By the time I pulled up to Black Ivy Inc., the place was already in full damage control. The front door was locked even though the sign said open. A man in a suit stood outside, clipboard in hand, talking to a wide-eyed employee. Health inspector, judging by the way he was flipping through paperwork. Perfect. I knocked once, slow and deliberate, before pushing the door open. Inside, Wyatt was pacing behind the counter, phone to his ear, his movements sharp and restless. His head snapped up when he saw me, and his whole expression shifted. I saw the realization hit. I smiled. "Bad day." He hung up the phone, bracing his hands against the counter like he needed the support. "You did this." I tilted my head. "Did what?" His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists. "You think you can just come in here and wreck my life?" I let out a short laugh, low and cold. "No, Wyatt. You did that yourself. I just made sure people noticed." He breathed hard through his nose, nostrils flaring. He wanted to hit me. I could see it in the way his muscles tensed, in the way his fingers flexed. "Good. Let him feel it. You think you're some kind of tough guy." He spat. Some righteous husband getting payback? I stepped closer, slow and deliberate. No, I'm the man who finishes what he starts. He swallowed, and for the first time, I saw it. The crack in his confidence. He was used to being the one in control, the one sweeping women off their feet with sad eyes and half-baked poetry. But men like him only know how to play when the rules favor them. Change the game, and they fall apart. I leaned in just enough that he could hear me over the sound of his own breathing. You should have picked someone else's wife. I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there in the ruins of his own mistakes. By the time I got home, Lorraine was gone, just like I knew she would be. The divorce went through quietly. She didn't fight. She couldn't. I had made sure of that. A few months later, I heard she moved in with Wyatt. From what I gathered, it didn't last. Men like him, they don't stick around when things get hard. And women like her, they don't know how to live without someone to blame. Me? I didn't look back. I had everything I needed, and I never lost a minute of sleep over any of it. 6 months later, I was sitting at O'Malley's, a hole-in-the-wall bar with stiff drinks and no small talk, when Ryan slid onto the stool next to me. He ordered a beer, took a slow sip, then gave me a sideways glance. Heard about Lorraine? I didn't look up from my whiskey. That's so? Ryan smirked. Yeah. Looks like your ex and lover boy didn't get their fairy tale ending. Big surprise. I swirled the glass in my hand, watching the ice shift. What happened? Ryan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like we were trading secrets. Wyatt lost the shop. Couldn't pay the fines, burned through his savings trying to fix it, and when the tax man came knocking, he folded. Place is boarded up now. He took another sip of his beer, shaking his head. I tried to open another shop under a different name. Didn't last. Turns out bad press sticks. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Ryan grinned. And Lorraine? She stuck around for a while, played house, probably thought they'd rebuild together. Then, shocker, he took off. Word is, he found himself a younger model. He snorted. Guess the tragic artist bit doesn't work as well when the bills start piling up. I let that settle in. No gloating, no satisfaction. Just confirmation of what I already knew. Some people ruin themselves. You just have to give them the time to do it. Ryan clinked his bottle against my glass. So, what now? You finally gonna take a vacation? Find yourself a nice, quiet life? I chuckled, low and slow. I don't do quiet. He grinned. Didn't think so. The bartender topped off my glass, and I sat there for a while, listening to the low hum of the bar, the shuffle of cards at the corner table, the sound of a city that never cared who you were, only how you played the game. I had played mine, and I had won. Not with fists, not with screaming matches or desperate gestures. I won the way men like me always do, with patience, precision, and the certainty that when the dust settles, I'll still be standing. Lorraine was a memory now. A lesson. Wyatt was nothing. And me? I was exactly where I was supposed to be.